Thank you very much for the invitation. Really happy to be here at this marvelous campus. We had so many nice walks today already. And yeah, today we're going to discuss DeFi attacks. So how would you define an attack in DeFi? Because I don't know, to be honest. So please help me out. Any idea?
There are no attacks.
I like that definition too. So okay, shall we call them incidents? So it's quite difficult to define the word attack, and we're also not aiming for any such definition. Maybe it's more like outliers or like outlier transactions, but the practitioners community at least is really referring to these as attacks. This is before I proceed, obviously, this is work with my great PhD students, of which Jens and Stefanos are here also today, and Roger and Donson. Yeah. So people are saying, and I still have troubles to understand the word attack as you have, but people are saying that attacks are posing a major challenge to DeFi and to inclusion in this network, right? There have been multi-million-dollar hacks, like for example here, Wormhole, Bridge had over $300 million, where then the VC that was backing this project had to jump in and help to rescue this project financially. The Ronin network here lost over $500 million in US dollar in an attack. So these are not small numbers, right? So the goal of our work here was to really understand what are these attacks about, and how can we systematically measure DeFi incidents, and what can we learn from past incidents to potentially prevent future incidents. On the time frame, so we looked at a time frame of 4 years, right, from 2018 up to recently at the beginning of the year 2022. And you can see here we group very briefly how many incidents there were that we are looking at. These are not all the incidents out there, but this is the corpus of data that we have looked at. Here in like 2021, you can see there were like over 100 incidents amounting to over $2 billion, right? And so these are obviously not small amounts. These are affecting the total value locked of the DeFi protocols. That's bad for these protocols because they aim to increase their TVL. They want to grow as much as possible. So these are obviously rather strong setbacks for these protocols. We've looked at both, by the way, Ethereum and Binance Chain, because these are the most active DeFi platforms out there at the time of writing this paper. So today's talk is going to be an overview of a DeFi reference frame that we propose, followed by an empirical analysis of past DeFi incidents, and then looking at what potential defense solution we could look into. This is definitely not a holistic view of defenses, but we're going to present some solutions or some ideas for solutions rather than worked out solutions themselves. So we're going to start with the reference frame. And this is really just to kind of align on the same language. We have different system layers. Like on top is the DeFi protocol layer. This is where the DeFi application is instantiated with the various token or asset standards, then exchanges, lending, stablecoin mixes, and so on, like all these applications that we have on a DeFi layer, right? Then we have the smart contract layer. So this is where you, for example, write code in Solidity or Viper or these languages. You do have a virtual execution environment, this EVM, for instance, on Ethereum, followed by the consensus layer, and then the network layer. Okay? We also have a so-called auxiliary layer to capture, for example, off-chain oracles, wallets, operators, and maybe also the UI, as the UI is relevant in DeFi protocols for security reasons. So what we're trying to do is to understand for these 181 DeFi incidents, in which of these layers do they fit? Which of these layers are they actually affecting? And to do this, we need to first define a threat model. We need to understand what is the adversary goal. So there might be an adversary goal that is of monetary value, right? As we've seen, these are not negligible amounts. But we've also experienced adversaries that are actually not motivated by monetary amounts. So do you have any idea maybe why would anyone perform DeFi attacks for fun and not profits? Any idea? Disruption, right? But what do you gain from that? It's just like breaking things for fun, or yeah?
Write a paper about it. Write a paper about it.
How to write a paper about it? Yeah, you don't get money. It's true. Okay, but what do you get?
To get a bounty.
You get fame, right, for a good paper. So it's about fame. There are Twitter accounts that are anonymous and they're performing attacks just for fame. Sometimes they're just returning the funds and they're not looking after the monetary. So it's kind of maybe some people would say it's not a rational adversary threat model, but it does exist, right? So for some people it might be rational. We consider different types of adversarial knowledges, like public, like whatever out there is public. A sequencer, it might be a miner or validator, maybe a block builder nowadays, and an insider, somebody who maybe developed the DeFi application and knows about a bug, right? So these are different kind of adversarial knowledges that we could assume. And then we have a set of 15 different adversary capabilities in the paper. I don't want to bore you with all of them. Like just for example, an Eclipse attack is one particular type of capability that an attacker could have. So what we looked into is we looked into these data sets of these projects out there. We extracted 181 incidents among this time frame. Most of them were on Ethereum, but also some of them on Binance. So this is just to get the different types of DeFi incidents, right? We then looked into academic papers, notably here at the top eight top conferences. So security, software engineering, most of them were security. And we extracted about 80 papers in this time frame, roughly 7 SOKs, a few tools, and attack papers. And then we looked into audit reports from companies, from leading smart contract security testing companies, and extracted their latest 30 most recent audits to see what they're covering and what they're not covering. And that's the result. It's not readable, I know. Jens was so kind to help me to make it a bit more readable for this presentation. So on this axis here, you can see the different layers. So you remember we discussed the different system layers at the beginning of the talk, right? So we have the network layer, consensus, smart contract, and so on. Then we have the different causes of an attack, and then more fine-grained types of attacks, like the main type of why an attack was possible. Here we have these papers that we looked into, right? So SOKs, tools, and papers. And here we have the 30 audit reports from companies that we looked into. Then here in this column, we have 3 things. So we first look here at the number of incidents that are the most popular, so to speak, among attackers. And then we're able here to see that 24% of the attacks are in fact some absence of coding logic or some missing sanity check, right, according to this taxonomy. And similarly, for the number of papers, we can see like, I think here 72% of the papers are looking into reentrancy. Has anybody here read a paper about reentrancy? Quite a few, right? So yeah, so we're trying to kind of organize all this data into this table. And is there anything in particular that is like jumping out for you, like anything that you notice by just looking at this?
The whole matrix. So focus on the SC layer.
Exactly, right?
Working consensus, I'm very secure.
Right? So smart contract layer seems to enjoy the majority of the attention, right? Sorry, Johan. Yeah, so that's definitely I mean, good, but also bad in some ways. We see that here, for example, the audit reports, they are not looking at all into the network layer. right? So this seems to be absent from industry reports. There is on-chain Oracle manipulations here are barely captured, although 15% of the incidents are this is the root cause of Oracle on manipulations. I mean, Uniswap now has the TWAP, which is a great first step, right? But I guess there's still much work to be done to design better oracles. And here, for example, this is a compromised private key or wallet, right? So there's also not that much work being done, at least in the works that we looked into. Okay, so we proceed then with the empirical analysis, and here we wanted to know or understand. So how can we compare DeFi protocols? Oh, sorry, that's a question.
I guess like a basic question you were mentioning at the start, it's hard to define what is an attack.
Yeah.
Like, what are some of the challenges there?
I think one of the core challenges would be in an Oracle manipulation attack. What you do is you distort a market by purchasing a particular asset, right? If that market is being used as a price oracle in, for example, a lending platform, then the lending platform could think that the debt positions there are now under collateralized. That means you can trigger, for example, liquidations or excessive liquidation, right? Just one example. Now you could say, well, that's just arbitrage. Arbitrage is a benign operation, right? And that's just how the market should allow to work. Yeah, it's hard to come up with a precise definition of an attack in that case, right? Some people are also of the stance that code is the law, maybe, but we all know that we are writing bugs in our code, right? So then it's not that obvious, right? In the buffer overflow, if you're writing if you're exceeding a buffer, right, and you're writing an arbitrary address in memory, it may be more easy to identify this as a bug, right? Because that's not an operation that you're supposed to do. Whereas here, I don't know, are you not supposed to exceed a certain transaction volume? That might be subjective, right? As a definition of an attack.
So what criteria do you use to like count the attacks?
Oh yeah. So I mean, what we relied on are these attacks that are reported here in these community-driven outlets, so to speak, right? So we didn't decide now whether these are attacks or not. We just followed just followed what they defined as an attack and followed through with that definition, and then assumed, okay, if that's an attack, what was the cause for this kind of a transaction to occur? We try to stay out of the definition. Yeah. All right, so we will proceed now to look into the protocols and the type of protocols and how they are affected by the incidents. So which type are more vulnerable than others. And we're going to look into a feature that some of the DeFi protocols enable, which is an emergency pause. So in this table, let's look here maybe at this very first row, right? So here we're interested to know whether the monetary loss is how it's related to the type of the DeFi protocol. So a type could be, for instance, a yield generator, a bridge, or the types of protocols that we're looking into. And we're seeing, well, 22% of the total loss goes to bridges or yield generators. So these are definitely the more vulnerable types in terms of lost monetary amounts, right? So if you're a liquidity provider, or if you're subscribing to an insurance, then this should be considered. This should be factored into your insurance premium, right? Okay, so then the second question is the number of security incidents related to the type of the DeFi protocol, right? So, for instance, here, the number of incidents on bridges is actually rather small. We have only 5% of the incidents touching bridges. And the TVL is also not that big. It's only 11 billion compared to almost 30 in DEXs. But 22% of the losses go towards bridges. Right? So it means the independent events are quite significant.
It's a little weird, right? Because there's probably a lot less bridges than there are like yield protocols. Or
True.
lending protocols.
Right.
So like we should have like a denominator.
We have normalized.
It's not,
Yes, that's true. Right.
right.
That's a good point. And then we ask whether the vulnerability type is related to the type of the DeFi protocol. So we can, for example, see here that the that lending DEX and stablecoins, so most of the vulnerabilities are related to the protocol layer, right? So not to the, for example, less to the network layer. Right? So we can make the distinction on which layer is affected by which vulnerability. Yeah. Again, the definition of a vulnerability is very vague and informal here, right? As is the definition of an attack. So keep that in mind. Yeah. Okay, so one, sorry, question, yeah?
Yeah, I guess another thing was, so we don't know, for these attacks that kind of look like arbitrage, how do we define the total value loss?
So the value lost is typically, so the projects are typically reporting what's the value lost, but you can also look on chain and try to understand then how much the for example, the TVL was reduced due to the attack, right? So this, you can quite objectively measure it, how much was lost. You could also measure it by how much the adversary gained, but that's a bit of an imprecise definition because the adversary might perform some swaps, maybe suffering from some losses in between, right? So I think the most accurate would be to look at the TVL before and after the transaction, the attack transaction, just to have this relative comparison.
I see, but part of it may also have resulted if I was doing an honest trade, but that we might.
Yeah, but if you look at the state just before the attack and after the attack, right, then you don't have any noise from so-called regular transactions, right? Because you can just look at the diff that the attacker transaction is causing, assuming there's only one attacker transaction, right? Which is not always the case. There might be multiple attacker transactions in some of the attacks that are being executed. So one mechanism to prevent an attack is to just ask the smart contract to please pause everything that you're doing, right? Just make a pause. We've seen that roughly 90 out of 180 protocols have an emergency pause mechanism, like 50%. It's actually much higher than I was anticipating. And we've seen that 25 out of these 90 have initiated the emergency pause, but only within the first 6 hours of the attack. So 6 hours is a long time, right? There's a lot of things that could happen afterwards. A lot of these attacks are not being executed optimally. So the attackers are leaving money on the table. There could be follow-up transactions that try to extract even further TVL from these protocols.
So these numbers don't add up to 87. That's because some of them have been out. So they were
Right.
They were never paused.
They were never paused. Exactly. Yep. Exactly. Yep. So here the sum of these is not 87, right? So not everybody executed the pause, at least within the first 6 hours. No, within the first 48 hours. Sorry. Yep.
What exactly is it pause?
Pausing means that you can no longer, for example, for DEX, right? You can no longer swap. So you can no longer trade token A for token B. That would be a pause. The definition of the pause may also depend on the DeFi application. Some may still allow you to withdraw your funds, and some may not. Right? They may literally freeze the platform. So that really depends on the definition of the protocol.
It's specific to subset users.
No, that should apply to all users, right? To anyone interacting with the contract. Otherwise, it could be circumvented by an attacker or by following users. Yeah. Yeah.
Because I just hear not out of these protocols, right? They're out of the protocols that actually paused. Because I mean, maybe I'm doing that number 24 divided by 87 is not 47%.
Right.
Yeah, so this is of the ones that paused.
Right.
It is okay. Yeah.
If you look to see if I was always wondering about this, if anyone actually have used the pause mechanism,
In what way? Like,
The pause is done by whoever is running the protocol.
right.
But has an attacker ever paused the protocol, taking control of the build pause protocol?
I don't think we've seen anything like this, but
Sure, it's coming.
yeah. I mean, I have seen Peg Shield offering a service like an emergency stop service by monitoring transactions and classifying a transaction as an attack or a benign transaction, and they can issue then a pause by front running the attack. And there, such an abuse may certainly happen because you will have false positives.
Yeah.
It's very hard to not have false positives in such a detection mechanism. Now, what's the downside? I mean, people will stop trading. There will be enhanced arbitrage once you resume. Maybe your reputation gets damaged a bit. So I don't. Yeah, certainly not good to have false positives, and there will be a cost to that. Yeah.
So who are the people that are?
Peg Shield. It's an auditing company. Yeah.
Excuse me?
Yep.
Yeah, so how do you calculate the percentage here? Because I do a simple math, like 24 protocol divided 87 protocol in total is not 47%.
Right. Jens, do you remember exactly what we did here?
I mean, how you get the percentage number of 47%?
6 hours, right?
If you add up the number of protocols, right, like 1 plus 24 plus 11 plus 7.
Yep.
And then divide that by 24, you get the 47. So
Right.
These are only the out of 87 is probably wrong. It must be out of like whatever the row above doesn't make it up.
Right. It shouldn't read out of the 87, right? It should read here out of those that paused, that effectively triggered the pause, which in this case is 51. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Right. So, I mean, one intuition would be, can we develop an intrusion detection tool to automatic trigger? Like there's a company already doing that, which is interesting as an attempt to further secure. But what other kinds of defensive solutions can we do, right? So we will look into a few. I think actually the first three here, which is the first is a rescue time analysis. So what we've seen is that many attackers, I think 56% of the attackers, they first deploy a contract, then they wait, and then they execute the attack, right? And at some point they finish the attack. So obviously in some attacks, there's only one transaction, but in a few of these attacks that we've looked at, there are several attack transactions. Now, it's not clear why attackers are doing that. They could literally do everything in a single atomic deployment and execution. And that would be also the most secure for an attacker to perform, to avoid front running or generalized front running bots, etc. So it's not clear why that's being done. But there's a time frame, at least in practice, where if we can detect, oh, this is a contract that will attack a DeFi protocol, and it will try to exploit this particular feature, then there may be a mechanism, there might be a way to build an automated mechanism to avoid that. Right? Again, here we're assuming that the attacker is not performing optimally and is somehow doing something wrong. Right. So the second thing we looked into is we took the EVM code of the attacks of the vulnerable DeFi protocols. We also took the EVM code of the adversarial code. We chopped the EVM code into n-grams, vectorized them, and then computed the Jacquard similarity of these vectors. And with this bytecode similarity, we were able to find that we found 100% similarity among 38 victim contracts. So this means if you have seen once a victim contract being exploited, for the next 37, you know precisely that this is a vulnerable victim contract, right? So it's funny that mistakes have been repeated on chain. Right? And similar for the adversarial contracts, where attackers are reusing adversarial contracts, we found 100% similarity among 29 adversarial contracts.
Do you know these are mostly because of like contracts that are forked from like that contract, or like what is the like is it, or is it the same like type of attack, like a specific type of redundancy attack? Like what is the similarity, like what are they? Like
So here, the 38 victim contracts, some of them are of the same protocol.
There's forks.
Not even forks, is the same contract deployed multiple times for the same protocol. So for example, in Uniswap, you can have multiple different contracts, right?
Sure. Oh, okay. So
And then there are exact forks, like copy pasting. And yeah, we did a pretty simple analysis here. So if we prove the bytecode similarity, maybe you can have even better results.
sure. Yeah, I guess like, is it reasonable to say, like, let's say you have, not that Uniswap V2 has some error, but let's say it did, right? Like, would it be reasonable to say like, oh, like all like 1,000 some odd pools are all different contracts, or should we just classify this all like one? And then go on like factory contract or something.
Here that when we say 100% similarity, it means that what we did, we took the bytecode and we just removed the arguments from the instructions. And we compare basically which opcodes have been used, and that's how we compute the similarity. So yeah, those are the exact same contracts deployed with different addresses, for example, hardcode addresses.
Or probably things also like in ETH and then copy just to be a forklift to BSC or something.
Yeah.
It's like another class. I think that's why.
I mean, people are even using the same addresses on different chains, right? So there's a lot
and
of
also here we have two chains, Binance and Ethereum, so there might be exact same deployments in various temperatures.
These are basically the same contracts.
Yeah.
But in the 80% similarity case, it doesn't really identify.
There might be false positives.
right? And finally, we were wondering, everybody knows flashbots and private relayers, right? How much are they being used to execute attacks, right? Because nowadays they're censoring, they're OFAC compliant. Are they attack compliant? Well, maybe not yet. So roughly 622 million went over the flashbots API apparently. Finally, 6 out of these 18 that went over flashbots, they were accelerated by an arbitrage trader. Now, okay, we don't have a proof that this is an arbitrage trader, but we looked at the account of these executions, and we have a network node that records the mempool. So if we see an attack on the mempool, which is then mined by a searcher on flashbots, which performs backrunning arbitrage on the attack, we classified it here as such an arbitrage trader, right? So this is based on our local view of our mempool. So we might have missed some, but yeah, that's the best we could do in this particular case. And the arbitrage opportunities after attacks are quite significant. So the bribing to the miners for these are equivalently quite significant. So miners are quite incentivized to mine these. Okay, so summary of key findings and challenges. So the network and consensus incidents are understudied, except for what Joachim is doing, obviously. Attackers appear to be specialized on one particular system layer. So we have not seen much evidence of sophistication on all system layers. So attackers that perform Eclipse attacks and the protocol layer and smart contract layer. So it's also quite interesting to see. Adversarial and vulnerable contracts are detectable through like these bytecode similarity analyzers, apparently. And we see that composability attacks are quite common, like these flash loan style attacks, oracle manipulation attacks are quite common. But I guess that's less surprising. Yeah. Okay. Well, one more thing. So the status quo is that attacks are being executed by miners and validators, right? They come either through some private channels or the peer-to-peer network to the miners and validators. Now, why couldn't the miners or validators also secure the application layer? Why are they okay with just executing these attacks? Right? This is kind of like puzzling to me, at least. So I think it would be great if we can build a system, an automated system, where we generate a counterattack, where the miner, instead of executing the attacker transaction, is in fact counter-attacking this attack. And the miner could then, if the DeFi protocol is being attacked, he could appropriate the funds, maybe take a 10% bounty and give it back to the DeFi protocol, right? It's a service, right? After all. So miners could also secure the application layer if they wanted to, because they have the authority to include or not include transactions. So we're still working on we started working on a such mechanism, like a generalized front runner that can front run attacks in real time. And we have done an empirical evaluation on like a year of past of Ethereum's past blockchain, given an archive node. And these are some of the attacks that we have found. In particular, yeah, maybe here the biggest is about 20 million. And you can also see that some of these were sent through like relayers, like flashbots, or they were broadcast on the peer-to-peer network. So miners could.
Isn't the validator just it's more profitable for the validator to do the attack itself rather than your company?
So the miner could just keep the money. Yep, that's a possibility. If the miner is happy in doing that. There's the question of whether this is benign behavior for the entire system, right? It would be a non-zero sum game if they would return the money, because then the entire system becomes more secure, more users will come, more money will flow in, more transaction fees, the miners will win more, right? So I think it's always a bit of a game theory question whether miners should do selfish mining or not, just to keep the chain healthier, right? Yeah, question?
Also, why should we not just like get good and then like not have like how do you construct a generalized like market that just like determines whether it was an target? Right, like if I cause a bunch of liquidations, how do you know it's market manipulation or actually like Coinbase decided to like drop the price of something by 5 cents and cost 99% of the liquidations?
Are you asking me to define an attack?
Yeah.
I told you I cannot.
It's much harder. I'm asking you to give an algorithm which tells me whether something is an attack, which is much harder than just defining it, right?
So the one thing we can measure is money, right?
Sure.
So all we need to measure is money, right? So if the amount, I mean, you could set a threshold, right? A miner, a validator could say, if there's a transaction that anyone can mine that is beyond 100K, for example, right, then I'm gonna front run it. And if there's a victim, we can pay it back to the victim. If there's no victim, then the miner can keep it.
But like, I mean, since Solana, right? It's like what, summer of 2021, right? The price of Solana dropped precipitously.
Okay.
And it was highly entertaining because it also cascaded liquidations, which brought on the network. But the whole point was, had that not happened, the network would be insolvent. So like, it would have looked very obviously as if it was like an attack to nearly any algorithm, but in particular, like, it was actually like a weird arms race between people trying to like withdraw their funds and like liquidators trying to liquidate because like the protocols themselves were like insolvent.
Okay.
Like, I think the problem fundamentally is like, while like the average case works probably great, the tail events, which are the one time that you really need to make sure that your network is fully live. And by when I say network and fully live, I mean like your protocol is like actually doing the thing it's supposed to do and liquidate. Like, you end up with like a weird set of false positives. And that's really bad because like now your protocol is underwater and you have no way of fixing it.
So you're implying that if you, so I'm trying to extract the question, right? So
yeah,
you're implying if a miner would, in this case, would perform the liquidations, that would be bad?
No. Well, what you're saying is a miner wouldn't perform the liquidations, right? The miner is like front running the attack and then paying back the victim. Right, so by this you mean like the miner performs the liquidation and then pays out the results of the liquidation to the victim?
I mean, it needs to be looked at case by case, right? At these, because we don't have a clear definition of an attack, right? We don't, like, a liquidation could yield like a few millions, right? That can happen.
Yeah.
Right. And here in this case, the miner or validator could front run the liquidation if it's, for example, right?
Sure.
And then if it's a liquidation and the miner is anyways doing MEV game and a liquidation game, he could just keep that that liquidation proceeds. No, there's nothing harmful in that, so to speak, right?
Right, but then like how do you distinguish that from like bad behavior if that is like good behavior?
So it, like, I'm not judging, right? It's really up to the validators or miners to decide what is good or what's not for the ecosystem. But I could imagine, for instance, if there's a there was a bridge hack in Binance, right? Whatever, 2 weeks ago or 20 days ago, where Binance had to interrupt the entire chain, patch the code, insert like blacklist addresses to prevent the attacker from exiting the chain. Instead of having all this hassle, why don't they just front run the bridge hack and nothing is really happening, right? So you don't affect liveness of the chain, you don't reduce the trust in the system, right? I mean,
yeah, I guess like the one time that you don't want this to fail is the time that it's most likely to fail, is I guess what I'm trying to get at. But also active. Thank you for the time. I have 2 minutes.
Oh, I was just gonna say in reply, like, why would it matter? Because like a miner, it either just like does what the attacker is trying to do, in which case it's good, like you would have this good event happen in this one time that it should succeed, or the miner would again do it, but it will do it itself, front running the attacker. And then if it turns out to be a good event, then the miner need not give back the money. And if it turns out to be a bad thing, then you can give the money and then take the 10% as the harm. And like in both cases, the event will happen.
right. It's
Okay.
it's inevitable, right? Once you have an exploit transaction, it's gonna happen. Now the question is what you do about it, right?
Sure.
It's like,
Yeah, maybe not fully understanding mechanism for like when to be distributed, when to not, and that's the part that but.
oh, I see.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Right. So we actually did find some new vulnerabilities also while scanning. Unfortunately, there was no more money for us to take, so this is too bad. So thank you.